Tonight, I want to talk a bit about using WatchUtils in the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. So, WatchUtils is cool. It's a very useful tool that you can use when you're building your apps with the JavaScript API. Before I can really talk about WatchUtils, though, we do kind of talk about Accessor, which is core to working with JavaScript APIs. This is one of those things that if you really want to get good at working with JavaScript API, you want to get into some of the advanced usage, it would really be beneficial to learn about Accessor in the API and kind of how it works, right? All of these extend Accessor at some point. Basically, is an ES5 accessor has a get set method, right? So it's a method get to get a property value and set method to set the property value. The key is that the set method, whenever the setter changes a value, it will kick off some sort of an observable somewhere. So it's not an event. It doesn't kick off an event, but you can watch for these property changes to occur. So there's a lot of frameworks provide this kind of utility in it. Things like Ember have it for sure. I think Angular has something very similar where you can watch for properties to change during runtime, right? And as those properties change, you can do something with them. It's almost like listening for an event to get emitted, but it's not. And it's much more precise, right? So you don't need to necessarily wait or hope that there's an event to happen when you're interested in something. For example, scale change. So when the map view scale changes, there's not an event for when that happens. And you don't want to maybe watch for an extent change. I don't even know if there's an extent change event anymore in the 4x API, but if there was, you wouldn't want to watch for the extent change and then hope that the scale change, you have to check it with the, check the previous extent to the new extent. You only care about when the scale changes so you can watch for that property to change. So you can look through the documentation for it. It kind of talks a little bit about the set method, but really there's a guide topic on working with properties in the API. You can set nested values. You can get nested values, and the key benefit for getting a nested value is the fact that if there's a null value in there somewhere, it's not going to error out or something like that, which is still very useful, even though you have the whole question mark check on property values today. But this still something like this here. Get basemap.title. So if basemap is null, it doesn't matter. This will just be null value here. It's not going to error, nothing weird like that, right? So this is these accessor methods, this accessor pattern that you have in the API is pretty key to the API, right? So everything that has an accessor or everything that extends accessor has a watch method. So a view could watch for its own property to change or its own properties to change, right? And when that happens, you're going to get this little watch handle here. So you have this kind of state for when you're watching things change, and then you can go ahead and remove that watcher, kind of like a remove an event listener, and it's no longer going to be holding on to watching the state change. So if you're removing things and adding things to your application and so on, you're having all these watch handles everywhere, make sure you remove them, because if you don't, and you're removing it, it's not going to get freed up from memory, kind of thing, right? Those are the little things you got to be careful for if you're doing it inside your application. Those kind of things can happen in when you're working with frameworks, something like that, like using useEffect and React. With useEffect, the return method should be some sort of a clear method, something, or a destroy method that is going to clear up any kind of event listeners you might have added. This is where you would do the handle.remove in your watch handles, right? Autocasting, I don't really talk too much about autocasting here, but basically it just is going to let you pass objects that have type parameters or a type value that look like a class constructor, and it's just going to go and create that class for you. So yeah, I won't get too much into the details of all of this stuff, but property watching is kind of key for having to know how to use the WatchUtils method, and that's kind of the reason you would do it. It's a very handy utility for doing stuff, and you can see here there's an awful lot of WatchUtil methods, right? And I'll talk about some of the ones I use the most, which could be like ones. Possible is really cool. Watch, stuff like that. So I've got a little app over here. I'm going to bring in WatchUtils. So first off, one question that comes up a lot I hear from users is like, oh, I'm trying to use WatchUtils, so I'm doing this. WatchUtils from at ArcGIS core, and this path is a little funky right now. Core WatchUtils, right? And then it's not going to what am I doing? Const? No, not const. Import. So there's my WatchUtils, but then if I let's just go ahead and log it out. The WatchUtils helper doesn't have a default export. Now, as of right now, it's a little tricky. You don't really know what has default exports and what doesn't. Yeah, see, it does not provide an export name default. A loose rule of thumb, but it doesn't apply everywhere. And I'll tell you, I think I know of a couple that doesn't apply, is if it's a lowercase, it does not have a default export. That means it has its own, it exports methods or something else from it. Well, it's going to be methods most of the time. So the ones that don't follow that rule is going to be as request and as reconfig. They're lowercase, but they do have default exports because they're very simple methods that are exported. But everything that's a class, a capital, would be some sort of class method or a class module. Those have default exports. So if you want to bring in all of WatchUtils, if that's like your groove, what you want to do, you need to do star as WatchUtils, and that'll work. All right, now you're going to have all of the WatchUtils methods available to you, right? This kind of defeats the purpose of ES6 and tree shaking and stuff like that. I mean, you can do it, but if you want to try and minimize some of what you're doing in your app, you can bring in maybe watch, right? Like actually no, yeah, let's just go for watch. Okay, so let's remove that log there. So maybe on the view, for example, I want to watch the accessors I want to watch, and then the property name, right? So the string of the name. So I'm gonna watch for ready, and then this is gonna happen every time that changes. So I'm gonna go ahead and just log it out. So we'll say ready, and then console dot log ready. Right. Very simple watcher, and this one is even a super useful one because view.when when view.when happens asynchronous, view.ready will be ready at that point as well, right? It'll be true. So this is going to happen every time that changes, but maybe I want to change it to something else. Extent, for example. You know what? And to make this easier, when I update stuff, I'm just call it value right here. So I should point out, what do I get back when I watch for something, right? So first thing I get back is going to be the new value. So whatever the current value is when this watch happens, I'm going to get back the old value, right? And you can see it over here. I get back the old value. I'm going to get back the property name, which would be extent in this case, and the target. And the target's going to be the view, because there's no rule that says this method has to be an anonymous method sitting here. I could have some sort of utility library of my own built up for my apps that pass my functions around to handle the watch handles, and maybe I just need some sort of generic naming. So I need to know what the new value is, what the old value is. Maybe I want to do some sort of a diff between those two, right? So like a scale change. Maybe I want to know what that different what the difference is between those scales, or even the extent. Maybe I want to calculate the extent changed from north to south or something like that, right? You could do stuff like that. Bring Geometry Engine in, do some cool stuff. So all right, so that fires because the extent was null when at this point, right? The time I'm watching the view, it's null. Once it loads the map and the base map and everything, then it generates an extent and then it gets applied. So that's why this watch happens here. So I can go in my extent here, and here's the extent has an extent, but really I need the where is that? Xmin, Xmax, Ymax, Ymin, and so on, right? Those are my values that I'm probably most interested in working with the extent. So that's one thing. Scale is another one. So scale is pretty cool too, right? So I'm watching for scale, and as I zoom in, zoom out, I'm getting my scale here, right? So notice I'm getting the intermediate values of my scale, right? So I go from one zoom level to another, but I'm getting all of these scale values in between as I am zooming in, right? I get that animation to zoom in. I get all of those scale values. So there might be something else I want to use here when I'm doing that. Okay, so let me go ahead and comment this one out real quick. So I'm going to do watch the view again. I'm going to watch scale. At this point, I want to do another watch of some sort, because I don't necessarily care about the intermediate values. So, but I want one that is going to be specific for my needs. So that'll be one of these here, like when false once. So the map view has some properties on it. So let's go over the map view, check it out, because I forget exactly what property I'm looking for. I think it's stationary. Come on, map view. Properties. So interacting. So indicates where the view is being interacted with. For example, panning or by interactive tool. That's not really what I'm looking for. I'm not panning. I'm doing a zoom. Navigating, where is it going to be navigate? No, that's panning again. No, I don't care about resolution, rotation. That's not what I'm looking for. I wanted to say it was updating, but I don't think it's updating. I'm more interested in, I believe it's going to be, yeah, here we go. Indicates stationary, indicates whether the view is animating, being navigated with, or resizing. So that's what I'm interested in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a helper for this. Watch, and let's say when false once, because I only want to run this one time. Although I think this is going to happen every time. We'll see right now. Let's see what happens. So when false once, view, let's say stationary. Stationary is false or true? I think it's going to be true. We'll bring in when true once as well. Okay, let's do that here. And this is like legit how I do stuff when I'm working on it. So these ones that only happen once, they're asynchronous, so they're promise based, because once it resolves, it only has to resolve one time, right? It's not like it's gonna happen again and again. If you need it to happen again and again, then you use just when false or when true. Then those have callback methods you can pass as a third argument. So we're gonna take my, I'll call it val. I don't even need it, to tell you the truth. I don't need this value. I just need this. Now I'm going to go ahead and console.log value, right? So this is the kind of thing that you would probably do. You're coming through here, you need to run that just the first time. Bam, right? So that log, you see, it didn't happen intermediately, but I still got all the intermediate values. So all I'm doing here, deferring all of these console.logs inside these asynchronous promises when it changes. And then all those promises just kind of finish when the stationary is true one time. But I have like a dozen that happen when it's true once, right? So not quite what I want. Helpful, but not exactly what I'm looking for, right? Not quite the right behavior, right? It's close. It's close. So I can't say it's not, I mean, it's not what I want, but I'm getting close. And close is half the battle, all right? Of course I am. Okay, so now I'm going to bring in pausable. Pausable is something I can pause, right? So let's try this. So we're going to say it's pausable, but I need a value to hold this. So I'm going to say const handle is equal to a pausable value. When it happens, handle, I'm going to assume it's pause. Yeah, okay, we'll go with pause. Yeah, handle.pause, and then once this is logged, handle.resume. All right. So what should happen here is the first time this happens, I zoom in, it's going to pause the watcher for the scale property because I don't need all those intermediate values. It's going to kick off my when true once promise to watch for this view stationary to be true. When it is, I mean that I'm done zooming in, I've hit the scale that I care about, then log that scale, and I resume my watcher on the scale. This is pretty much how you would handle a situation like that, right? It's probably the easiest way to do it. If I'm being honest, there's a couple ways to do it. I could have the, well, no, I don't know. I think you get into some trickiness of recursive functions if you try it another way, which would work. I've done it before, but it's definitely not the ideal way. This pausable is really the more cleaner way to do it, and that's why it's there, right? So all of these methods that are part of WatchUtils, they're here because as we were developing parts of the API, we had a need for them, right? We're doing a lot of asynchronous stuff in the API, especially 3D. There's a lot of like having to watch for things to change when they're defined, when they're not. So that's why we need them. This when equal once, that's really useful for like the 3D guys. I know they use that quite a bit. Things like that, right? So I don't have a layer on here, so I can't really do a layer view one. But layer view is also an interesting, well, using WatchUtils with the layer view is also really interesting because you can watch for the layer view updating to be done. Because it's like the map view. It's pulling data, making requests, doing all kinds of cool stuff. So that's another one you could use it on. I've shown that plenty of times, how to watch for when the layer view is ready, but the view is very similar. So the view one would be a very similar case. Maybe you want to start doing something with the view. I mean, I don't know what you would do, but it would be you'd use when false once. So for example, we would watch for when false once view. Actually, no, we should probably do it something else. So let's say that we're doing it here as well. So we're going to do it in this one too. Well, actually, no. So view stationary. And I don't know if this is going to work. Let's try it. When false once view updating. So the view updating will happen when in this case here, for example, the base map will still be requesting tiles, for example, right? So when it's done requesting tiles and it's done drawing, then updating should be false at that point. So what I want to say is going to happen is that even though the view is stationary, it's no longer zooming, the actual under the hood might still be trying to fetch data and draw it, even though you're done moving the map, right? So let me see. When false once updating, let's see, console.log view done updating. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that works. Boom. Yep. See, so at this point, even though it's stationary, the view under the hood still fetches some tiles, and it kind of buffers it a bit. I think that's kind of what you're seeing, even though you zoom in, and that work capped there. So you can kind of see it here. If I zoom in, things are still drawing, and they barely finished drawing, and it's done rendering, right? So the updating isn't necessarily just for the fetching of data. Updating is going to be false on a view and layer views when it's fetched the data and drawn the data. So the data should be rendered at that point when the updating is false. That's a good way to know. The view updating is useful too because if there's multiple layers in your map or in your map view, multiple layer views, then view updating should be false when all of the other child layer views it has are also going to be updating of false. So view updating is another one you can watch instead of just the layer view. That's really useful if you're going to make a handful of queries against different layer views. Like maybe you want to pull features from one layer view and then use those geometries to query another layer view and so on and so forth. Just watch for the view updating to be false. When it is, and you can start doing all your layer view queries and kick off some really nice and cool stuff. That is WatchUtils. Remember, the main thing importing it, for one, is that you would want to import the individual functions for just efficiency's sake. If you're using build tools, you will probably get some tree shaking out of that. Or if not, just do import star as WatchUtils and you'll get all of them available for you to use. So that's not a best practice necessarily, but you could still do it. I'm not going to judge. I will, but I'm going to tell you I'm not going to judge. But I'm secretly judging when you do that, because you will ask me that question down the road. But yeah, use that. There's some really complicated methods you can do for watching properties to change. I showed the simple one here with the pausable. And you pause the handle, do another watch. When that watch is done, you resume the handle for the pausable, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's really fun stuff. I enjoy it. So, you know, but these are the kind of things that when you really grasp them and you get a good handle on them, along with, you know, accessors, property watching, everything else like that, you can do some pretty nice advanced stuff with the JavaScript API. So go try it out. If you have questions, feel free to hit me up. All right, thanks.